I'm Ron Strickland. This webcast is one of a series in which I'm presenting some brief lectures and commentaries on topics from the courses I teach in literature and cultural studies. This particular webcast is one of a series on Virginia Woolf's essay, A Room of One's Own. In a previous webcast, I discussed Woolf's account of the indignity that she suffered at the hands of a male beadle or security guard who reprimanded her for walking on the grass when she was invited to Cambridge University as a famous woman novelist to give a lecture to female students. Here I'll turn to a section of the essay in which she reflects upon the conditions of philanthropy in a patriarchal society. Why is it that the families who make money and donate money to educational institutions donate the money for men's colleges? Why have not the wealthy mothers of the world donated money to found women's colleges with resources to match those of the men's colleges? So she walks along and she starts thinking about all the writers, all the male writers who have studied at Cambridge and have walked these very paths that she's walking now. And so she starts thinking of John Milton. And you may recall, Milton also was a student at Cambridge. And then she thinks of Charles Lamb, the English essayist. And who knows why, some random thought comes into her head. And she recalls that Charles Lamb wrote an essay in which he couldn't imagine that Milton could have crossed out a line or crossed out a word in his famous poem Lycidas, which was an elegy on the Cambridge undergraduate student Edward King. That poem seemed so perfect to Charles Lamb, he couldn't imagine that Milton would have crossed out lines and reworked it, and that there could have been something wrong with it that needed to be corrected. And so she wonders to herself what words Milton had crossed out that so alarmed Charles Lamb. Or since Charles Lamb raised the issue, she just begins to wonder what line was crossed out. This, by the way, is stream of consciousness writing. Notice how this is organized, but it doesn't seem organized. She doesn't exactly say, well, I was thinking, then I was walking on the grass, and then I got angry at the beetle, and now I'm going to tell you about it. Instead, she gives you her thoughts kind of the way we might think them, as we're trying to think about what to write in our essay, and we get distracted, and one thing leads to another, and pretty soon we're wondering which words Milton crossed out in his famous poem, Lycidas. And that's where she is, right? Now, it just so happens that the manuscript of Milton's poem, Lycidas, is in one of the libraries at Cambridge. And she happens to be at Cambridge. There's the library. Milton's papers are there. It occurred to me that the very manuscript itself, which Lamb had looked at, was only a few hundred yards away, so that one could follow Lamb's footsteps across the quadrangle. Presumably she'll walk on the gravel and not on the grass, to that famous library where the treasure is kept. Moreover, I recollected as I put this plan into execution, it is in this famous library that the manuscript of Thackeray's Esmond is also preserved. The critics often say that Esmond is Thackeray's most perfect novel. Is it the case that Thackeray's most perfect novel may have corrections in the manuscript? In which case, how did it become to be? Did perfection not just happen, or was it a work of process? You see how her stream of consciousness is working. First Lamb, then Milton, then Thackeray, then perfection, crossing out words in an essay. But anyway, she's thinking these things, and so she walks toward the library. And so she's deep in this thought. One thing leads to another, stream of consciousness, which, here's the door. But here I was actually at the door, which leads into the library itself. I must have opened it, for instantly there issued, like a guardian angel barring the way with a flutter of black gown instead of white wings. This angel is black, not white, a deprecating, silvery, kindly gentleman who regretted in a low voice as he waved me back that ladies are only admitted to the library if accompanied by a fellow of the college or furnished with a letter of introduction. So she's chased away from the library too. She's getting no respect at Cambridge. But she goes to the luncheon. The food is not so good. Remember this, plain soup. The soup is so thin that you could read the pattern on the plate. That is, if the plate had a pattern, but this china is so plain that it doesn't have any design on the plate even. And she reflects why the food at the men's colleges is so much better and the china is better. Note the similarities of the highlighted text here to the idealization of Conrad's Kurtz that we just read last week. This is what might be like. It might be like for the men at the college, the young men at the college, the male students. Not like this for the female students. They have to be grateful just for being there. But if only Mrs. Seton and her mother before her had learnt the great art of making money and had left their money, like their fathers and their grandfathers before them, to found fellowships and lectureships and prizes and scholarships appropriated to the use of their own sex, that is, the female sex. We might have dined very tolerably up here alone off a bird and a bottle of wine. We might have looked forward without undue confidence to a pleasant and honorable lifetime spent in the shelter of one of the liberally endowed professions. These men, they go to prep school, they go to the so-called British public school, which is really a private school, then they get tutored, and then they go to Oxford or Cambridge, and then they enter the law or finance. They just drift through life with everything laid out for them. Not so for the women, because our mothers and our grandmothers didn't make a lot of money and donate it to universities for our benefit, unlike the men. What were they thinking? If that were the case, we might have been exploring or writing, mooning about the venerable places of the earth, sitting contemplative on the steps of the Parthenon, or going at 10 to an office and coming home comfortably at 4:30 to write a little poetry. This is the life of those captains of finance and the law and politics. Wolfe concludes then that if their grandmothers had made more money, there would have been no future generations, no men or women. Only if Mrs. Seton and her like had gone into business at the age of 15, there would have been, there's the rub. That was the snag in the argument. No Mary. And also no William either, right? What, I asked, did Mary think of that? There between the curtains was the October night, calm and lovely, with a star or two caught in the yellowing trees. Was she ready to resign her share of it and her memories? But they had been a happy family, though a large one, of games and quarrels up in Scotland, which she is never tired of praising for the fineness of its air and the quality of its cakes, in order that Farnham might have been endowed with £50,000 or so by a stroke of the pen. This is how it's done for the men's colleges. And it's only in the last 48 years that Mrs. Seton has had a penny of her own in England. That is, only at this time, in the last 48 years, that it was legal in England for a woman to have her own bank account without the permission of her husband, for a woman to own her own property. For all the centuries before that, it would have been her husband's property, a thought which perhaps may have had its share in keeping Mrs. Seton and her mothers off the stock exchange. Pretty good disincentive for not making money if all the money you make is going to be your husband's property. Every penny I earn, they may have said, will be taken from me and disposed of according to my husband's wisdom. Perhaps to found a scholarship or to endow a fellowship in Balliol or King's College. So that to earn money, even if I could earn money, is not a matter that interests me very greatly. I'd better leave it to my husband. On that point, I'll conclude for now, but I'll take up Wolfe's essay again in a subsequent webcast. As always, if you have questions or comments, send me an email.